Young and the Restless spoilers full episodes recap the 23rd of March 2026. The neon bleed of the Las Vegas Strip filtered through the half-drawn Venetian blinds of the penthouse suite, casting fractured, restless shadows across the plush carpet. The ambient hum of Sin City, a siren song of desperation, greed, and glittering illusions, was entirely drowned out by the deafening silence inside the room. The air was thick, suffocating, charged with the kind of kinetic electricity that precedes a fatal lightning strike. Riza Thompson stood in the center of the room, her feet planted shoulder-width apart, her posture rigid. In her trembling hands, a matte black semi-automatic pistol was leveled directly at Adam Newman's chest. Adam didn't flinch. He stood his ground, his hands raised just slightly, palms facing outward in a universal gesture of placation, though his dark eyes burned with the cold, calculating intensity of the man who once ruled this city's underground as Spider. Beside him, his half-brother Nick Newman was a coiled spring, every muscle in his broad shoulders tensed, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked erratically in his cheek. Nick's eyes darted from the barrel of the gun to Riza's face, calculating the distance, the odds of crossing the room before she could pull the trigger. The odds were abhorrent, and they all knew it. Riza Adams set his voice a low, steady baritone that betrayed none of the ice water panic coursing through his veins. "You don't want to do this. I know you. This isn't you." "You don't know anything," Adam Riza snapped, her voice cracking, betraying the sheer terror hiding behind her hostility. The gun wavered just a fraction of an inch, but in a high-stakes standoff, a fraction of an inch was a mile. "You shouldn't have come back here. You should have stayed in Genoa City. You should have left the past buried." "We couldn't do that," Nick interjected, his voice, a harsh, gravelly rasp. He took a microscopic half-step forward, inserting himself slightly between Adam and the line of fire. "We're not here for you, Riza. We're here for him. You know why we're here. Put the damn gun down before this ends, in a way nobody can walk away from." The tension in the room ratcheted up to an agonizing degree. The metallic click of Riza thumbing the safety off echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous suite. Adam's heart hammered against his ribs. He had walked into this room expecting a reunion with a trusted former ally, a woman who had once helped him navigate the treacherous waters of his amnesiac years. Instead, he had walked into an ambush. The risk was astronomical. One wrong word, one sudden movement from Nick, and the pristine walls of the suite would be painted with Newman blood. "Riza, look at me," Adam commanded, pouring every ounce of his inherent magnetism and authority into the words. He locked his gaze onto hers, refusing to let her look away. "We were friends. We watched each other's backs when the rest of the world wanted us dead. I trusted you with my life back then. I am trusting you with it now. Lower the gun." For a moment that stretched into eternity, nobody breathed. The flashing neon of a casino marquee outside bathed Riza's face in alternating washes of crimson and gold, highlighting the sheen of cold sweat on her forehead and the desperate, cornered animal look in her eyes. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving, the internal war raging behind her, dark eyes visible to both brothers. Slowly, agonizingly, the tremor in her hands intensified. A ragged sob tore from her throat, shattering the silence. The barrel of the gun dipped, first an inch, then a foot, until the weapon was pointing at the floor. With a sudden jerky motion, Riza turned and slammed the gun onto the glass surface of the coffee table. The heavy thud of metal on glass broke the spell. Nick immediately exhaled, a harsh breath, his hands dropping to his sides as he ran a hand through his hair, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical blow. Adam didn't move for a second, his eyes remaining locked on Riza as she collapsed onto the edge of a velvet sofa, burying her face in her trembling hands. "What the hell was that?" Riza Adam demanded, the forced calm of his negotiator persona evaporating, replaced by a sharp, biting anger. He closed the distance between them, towering over her. "I came to you for help. I came to you because you were the one person in this godforsaken city I thought I could still trust, and you pull a gun on me." Riza looked up, her makeup slightly smudged, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The fierce, untouchable queen of the Vegas card sharks was gone, replaced by a woman who looked entirely broken. "I didn't have a choice, Adam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You think I wanted to do that? You think I wanted to put a bullet in you? I had to. I was ordered to." Adam frowned, exchanging a bewildered look with Nick. "Ordered by who? You don't take orders from anyone, Riza. You run your own game." Riza let out a bitter, hollow laugh that held no humor. "Not anymore. Not since he came to town. He took over everything. The clubs, the underground games, the supply lines. He bought the cops, he bought the dealers, and the ones he couldn't buy, he buried. He owns me, Adam. He owns all of us. Who? Nick pressed, his voice rising, a sickening feeling of dread already beginning to pool in the pit of his stomach. He stepped closer, his imposing frame casting a long shadow over the coffee table. Who are you talking about? Riza swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting the devil himself to kick it down. When she spoke, the name dropped into the room like a live grenade. Matt Clark. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Adam felt as though the floor had just dropped out from beneath his feet. He stared at Riza, searching her face for any sign of a lie, any hint of a sick joke. There was none. Only raw, unadulterated fear. Matt. Nick breathed the name, tasting like ash in his mouth. The color drained from Nick's face, replaced by a rigid, terrifying pallor. Matt Clark, the architect of so much of his pain. The man who had caused the devastating car crash that had left Nick in agony, the man who had stalked his family, the man they had come to Vegas to hunt down and end once and for all. That's impossible, Adam said, his voice hard, rejecting the reality. Matt is a ghost. He's on the run. He's a fugitive, hiding in the shadows. He doesn't have the resources or the muscle to take over the Vegas syndicate. He doesn't have the power to force someone like you to turn on me. You're underestimating him. Adam Riza shot back her defensive fire, returning for a brief moment. You've been sitting in your ivory tower in Genoa City, playing corporate games. You don't know what it's like down here in the dirt anymore. Matt didn't just come to Vegas to hide. He came here to build an empire, and he used the hatred he has for your family as the foundation. She stood up, pacing agitatedly across the room, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if trying to hold herself together. He found me. He knew about my connection to you. He knew about the Spider Days. He didn't just ask for my cooperation, Adam. He held a gun to the head of my sister. He told me that if I didn't help him funnel his drugs, if I didn't act as his eyes and ears on the strip, he would slaughter everyone I cared about. I was forced into this. It was never my will to betray you. But when you called, when you said you were coming to Vegas, Matt knew before your plane even touched the tarmac. The revelation hit Adam like a physical blow. A huge surge of surprise followed instantly by a sickening wave of guilt and realization washed over him. He had arrogantly assumed he was walking back into his old territory as the conquering king, ready to use his old network to easily flush out a desperate fugitive. Instead, he had walked blindly into a city that had been entirely compromised, weaponized against him by a man whose vendetta against the Newmans knew no bounds. He knew we were coming, Nick repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. He looked at Adam, his eyes dark with a stormy, violent rage. This whole time. The tips, the rumors, the breadcrumbs we followed from Wisconsin to Nevada, it was all him. Yes, Riza confirmed, turning to face the brothers, her expression grim. And you need to listen to me very carefully. You need to turn around, get back on your private jet, and leave this city tonight. Because Matt isn't hiding from you. He has set a trap. A massive, inescapable trap, and you two just walked right into the center of it. Adam's jaw tightened. Tell us about the trap, Riza. Everything. Riza shook her head, her eyes wide with desperation. You don't understand, Adam. This isn't a game of poker where you can just bluff your way out. Matt has spent weeks preparing for this. The location you were planning to hit tomorrow, the warehouse on the edge of the desert, it's rigged. He has heavily armed men stationed at every exit. He has the local authorities looking the other way. He wants you there. He wants you to think you have the drop on him so he can lock the doors and burn the place to the ground with both of you inside. Nick swore under his breath, turning away to pace the length of the window, his mind racing. The hunt for Matt Clark, which they had meticulously planned for weeks, had just been completely turned on its head. It gets worse. Riza continued, her voice urgent, emphasizing every syllable to ensure the gravity of the situation penetrated their stubborn Newman skulls. The hunt for Matt is going to be infinitely more complex and dangerous than you initially expected. He hasn't just set a physical trap, he's set a psychological one. Every contact you think you have in this city, they work for him now. Every dealer, every bartender, every pit boss who used to owe Spider a favor, they will smile at you, take your money, and then text Matt your exact coordinates. You have no allies here. You are completely isolated. Adam felt a cold sweat break out along his spine. The realization was absolute and terrifying. The situation had fundamentally changed. This was no longer a simple search and destroy mission. Matt's trap wasn't just a physical location. It was the entire city of Las Vegas. They were trapped in a sprawling neon-lit labyrinth, and Matt Clark was the Minotaur waiting in the center. He wants to make a spectacle of it, Riza warned, her voice dropping to a haunting whisper. He hates Nick for the past, and he hates you, Adam, for existing. He doesn't just want to kill you, he wants to break you. He wants to trap you in a life or death game where every move you make only tightens the noose around your own necks. Nick stopped pacing and looked at Adam. The brotherly friction that so often defined their relationship was entirely absent, replaced by a grim shared understanding of the existential threat they were facing. They had come here as hunters, confident and righteous in their anger. Now they were the prey. The realization that they could genuinely die in this desert, far from their family, far from Genoa City, settled over them like a heavy, suffocating blanket. We need to rethink everything, Nick said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. He walked back to the center of the room, standing shoulder to shoulder with Adam. If what she's saying is true, our entire playbook is useless. We go to that warehouse tomorrow, we die. It's true, Adam agreed, his mind already spinning, calculating, shifting gears from the aggressive spider persona to the cold, analytical strategist that made him a formidable Newman. Matt used my own arrogance against me. He knew I would reach out to you, Riza. He knew I would try to use the underground. He played us flawlessly. Adam and Nick turned away from Riza, instinctively forming a tight, closed circle of two. They began to analyze the warning, rapidly dissecting the information Riza had provided. We have to assume we are being watched right now, Adam murmured, his eyes scanning the room for hidden cameras, though he knew Matt's surveillance was likely more human and pervasive. The lobby, the valet, the casino floor, we are marked. So we don't use the front door, Nick replied, his tactical mind engaging. We don't use the cars we rented. We drop our phones. If he's tracking our digital footprint, we go analog. We go completely off the grid. That's not enough, Nick, Adam argued, shaking his head. Reassessing the risk level means acknowledging that we are outgunned and outmaneuvered. If Matt controls the local syndicate, he has an army. We are two guys in suits. We can't shoot our way out of this. Then what's the plan? Nick demanded, his frustration bleeding through. We can't just run. I am not leaving Vegas until Matt Clark is no longer a threat to my family. I am not looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. We don't run, Adam said, a dark, dangerous glint returning to his eyes. The situation was dire, but Adam Newman was never more dangerous than when he was backed into a corner. But we don't walk into his trap either. We flip the board. If he expects us at the warehouse, we don't go. If he expects us to use my old contacts, we avoid them like the plague. We have to become unpredictable. We have to find the one thing, the one person in this city that Matt hasn't bought, and we use them to strike back. They continued to map out their next moves, their voices low and urgent. Every scenario they ran ended in unacceptable levels of risk. The complexity of the situation was staggering. How do you hunt a man who controls the environment you're hunting him in? How do you spring a trap when you're already standing inside the cage? As they strategized the sheer weight of the truth about Matt Clark, and Riza began to press down on them, increasing the pressure to an almost unbearable degree. Riza remained on the sofa, a silent, tragic testament to Matt's ruthlessness. Her betrayal born of coercion and terror was a stark reminder of the stakes. Matt wasn't playing by any rules. He was willing to destroy innocent lives, to leverage family, to use any means necessary to achieve his vengeance. Adam looked at his brother. Nick's face was etched with exhaustion and a grim, unyielding determination. They had fought on opposite sides of countless wars torn apart by jealousy, corporate backstabbing, and the toxic legacy of their father, Victor Newman. But standing here in the neon-drenched belly of Las Vegas, facing a monster who wanted them both dead, they were fundamentally united. He thinks he has us, Adam said quietly, his voice carrying a chilling resolve. He thinks because he bought my city and terrified my friends that he's already won. Let him think that, Nick replied, his eyes locked onto Adam's. Let him get comfortable. Let him wait at that warehouse for ghosts that are never going to show up. The situation was incredibly dire. They were cut off, surrounded, and walking a tightrope over a blazing inferno. The trap Matt Clark had set was brilliant, a masterpiece of manipulation and malice that had pushed Adam and Nick into an extremely difficult situation, perhaps the most dangerous of their lives. The hunt had transformed into a high-stakes game of survival, a brutal chess match where the loser would pay with their life. Adam turned back to Riza, who flinched slightly as he approached. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply reached down, picked up the matte black pistol from the glass table, and expertly popped the magazine out, checking the chamber, before sliding it into the waistband of his trousers. You're going to stay here, Riza. Adam instructed his tone, leaving no room for argument. You're going to lock the door and you're not going to answer it for anyone. If Matt calls you, tell him we left. You tell him I got spooked and dragged my brother onto the first flight back to Genoa City. He won't believe me, Riza whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. He knows you too well, Adam. He knows you won't run. He doesn't need to believe you, Nick said, stepping up beside Adam, his presence a solid, immovable force in the center of the chaos. He just needs to doubt his own plan for a few hours. That's all the time we need. The brothers shared one final silent look of agreement. The air in the room was no longer just tense. It was vibrating with a lethal purpose. The revelation of Matt Clark's power, the tragic coercion of Riza, and the terrifying reality of the trap waiting for them had stripped away all their previous assumptions. They were in the dark navigating a minefield, blindfolded. The pressure was immense, a physical weight bearing down on their shoulders, threatening to crush them. But as Adam and Nick moved toward the door of the penthouse, leaving the trembling Riza behind, they were no longer just two men hunting a fugitive. They were Newmans backed into a corner with their survival on the line. And in Las Vegas, the one rule everyone eventually learned was that you never, ever bet against the house. The game of life and death had officially begun, and the stakes had never been higher. The walls of the Genoa City Courthouse conference room felt as though they were inching closer, millimeter by millimeter, threatening to crush the breath right out of Mariah Copeland's lungs. The air was stale, thick with the suffocating scent of lemon polish, old paper, and the undeniable metallic tang of impending doom. Mariah sat frozen in the center of the room, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were entirely bloodless. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a relentless, maddening hum, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across her pale face. She looked like a ghost of the vibrant, fiercely independent woman she had once been. The heavy legal pressure following the horrifying climax of the Dominic incident had stripped her down to the studs, leaving behind a hollow shell trembling under the weight of her own catastrophic actions. The heavy oak door unlatched with a sharp echoing click, shattering the fragile silence of the room. Mariah flinched, her eyes darting toward the threshold like a cornered animal. Sharon Rosales stepped into the room first, her face a tragic mask of maternal anguish. Her eyes were already rimmed with red, the tears she had been fighting so desperately threatening to spill over at the mere sight of her broken daughter. Right behind her was Christine Blair, her sharp, tailored suit a stark contrast to the profound, empathetic sorrow etched into her features. As a lawyer, Christine had seen her fair share of tragedy, but this case, this heart-wrenching unraveling of a young woman she had known for years, was a different kind of agony. The atmosphere in the room instantly plummeted, growing so dense and heavy that it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Sharon moved slowly, as if approaching a fragile pane of glass that might shatter at the slightest vibration. She pulled out the chair across from Mariah and sank into it, reaching across the cold mahogany table. Mariah instinctively pulled her hands back, a microscopic flinch that sent a fresh wave of devastation crashing over Sharon's features. Mariah, Sharon whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of 1,000 unspoken apologies and fears. "Oh, my sweet girl." Mariah swallowed hard, the lump in her throat feeling like swallowed glass. "Don't, Mom. Please don't look at me like that. I can't bear it when you look at me like I'm a tragedy." Christine gently set her leather briefcase on the table, the soft thud punctuating the tense silence. She took the seat next to Sharon, folding her hands in front of her. "Mariah, we need to talk about reality. We need to talk about what happens next." The district attorney is not backing down. The charges are severe. Kidnapping a child, even under the veil of a severe psychological break, carries mandatory minimums that we cannot simply wish away. The word hung in the air, venomous and absolute. Asterisk. Kidnapping. Asterisk. Mariah closed her eyes, a solitary tear escaping and tracing a hot, jagged path down her cheek. The memories flashed behind her eyelids like a terrifying, disjointed horror film. The overwhelming, suffocating desperation, the absolute terrifying certainty that she was the only one who could protect Dominic. The way she had slipped into the Chancellor Mansion, her mind fractured, her reality completely distorted by the trauma of her surrogacy and the terrifying ordeal of her own captivity. She had taken him. She had taken the baby she carried for 9 months, the baby she had sung to, the baby she had named Bowie. In the dark, desperate hours of her own kidnapping, she had believed in her broken mind that she was saving him. But the law didn't care about the fractured logic of a shattered mind. The law only saw a stolen child and a terrified family. "I know what I did," Mariah whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the lights. "I hear his cries every time I close my eyes. I feel the weight of him in my arms. I know I took him, Christine. You don't have to sugarcoat it. We aren't here to sugarcoat it, sweetheart, Sharon said, leaning forward, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. We are here to save your life. Because if you go to prison, Mariah, if you go to a state penitentiary in the state of mind you are in right now, you won't survive it. And I cannot lose my daughter. I will not lose you. Christine opened her briefcase and withdrew a crisp white manila folder, laying it flat on the table. I have spent the last 48 hours in relentless negotiations with the DA and the judge. Given your history, the profound trauma you suffered during your pregnancy, and the undeniable evidence of postpartum psychosis and severe PTSD, they are willing to offer a plea deal. Mariah's eyes flickered open, locking onto the folder as if it were a loaded weapon. A plea deal. Yes, Christine affirmed, her tone steady, professional, yet deeply compassionate. They are willing to reduce the charges and suspend the prison sentence, but it comes with non-negotiable stipulations. You must officially enter a plea of guilty to the lesser charges. More importantly, you must be remanded immediately to a secure psychiatric facility for intensive long-term treatment. You need profound psychological intervention, Mariah. The court recognizes that you need healing, not punishment, but you have to accept it. The words echoed in the sterile room, asterisk, guilty, asterisk, asterisk, psychiatric facility, asterisk, asterisk, treatment, asterisk. Mariah stared at the folder, a violent, agonizing war raging within her soul. On one side was the terrifying prospect of facing a cold, unforgiving prison sentence, a punishment that a dark, self-loathing part of her believed she entirely deserved for the pain she had caused Abby, Devon, and Chance. She had terrorized them. She had ripped their world apart because she couldn't hold her own together. Didn't she deserve to be locked away in the dark? Didn't she deserve to be punished for becoming the very monster she had feared? But on the other side of the battlefield was a tiny, fragile spark of the old Mariah, the survivor, the woman who had fought tooth and nail to build a life out of the ashes of a cult, to find love, to find a family. That part of her recognized the truth in Sharon's tear-filled eyes. She was sick. The trauma of being locked in that room by Stitch, of giving birth in captivity, of handing over the baby she had bonded with in the most terrifying circumstances imaginable. It had broken her mind. It had shattered her psyche into a million jagged pieces, and she had been bleeding out ever since. If I take the plea, Mariah said, her voice shaking, I admit that I'm crazy. I admit that I am a danger. You admit that you are injured, Mariah, Sharon corrected, fiercely reaching out and finally gripping Mariah's trembling hands. Mariah didn't pull away this time. She let her mother's warmth seep into her freezing skin. You admit that you suffered a psychological injury that you could not control. There is no shame in being broken, baby. The only tragedy is refusing to let anyone put you back together. Mariah looked down at her mother's hands, then up at Christine. The internal struggle was agonizing. To plead guilty was to surrender the last illusion of control she had over her life. It meant submitting to doctors, to medications, to locked wards and endless grueling therapy sessions. It meant facing the darkest, most terrifying corners of her own mind. I'll do it, Mariah finally whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Sharon let out a choked sob of relief, bowing her head over their joined hands. But Mariah added, her voice suddenly finding a sliver of its old stubborn steel. She pulled her hands back gently, sitting up straighter. I have a condition. Christine blinked slightly, taken aback. Mariah, the DA isn't really in a position to entertain counter demands. It's not for the DA, it's for me. Mariah interrupted, her eyes locking onto Christine with a fierce, burning intensity. If I am going to do this, if I am going to plead guilty and surrender my freedom, I am not going to some local halfway house or a standard hospital ward where they just drug me into a stupor so I stop crying. I know how deep this goes, Christine. I know how profoundly broken I am. The things I see when I close my eyes, the terrifying thoughts that made me think stealing a baby was the right thing to do, that doesn't get fixed with group therapy and a mild sedative.